Hey, good morning, guys. I thought I would do a quick video for you uh, because the new pose of the month is spinal extension. And I wanted to do a little bit of a conversation with you about the anatomy, why this is so important. And then if you have questions, you can certainly let me know. So let's start with sort of the bullet points or the more important things. Spinal extension is really about counteracting what we do all day, every day. So like when I'm sitting right now, I'm in spinal flexion, no question. And the thing with the head is that it's not so much that you're in flexion, we can be, but it's more that the head tends to kind of stick forward. We tend to lead with it. So the important pieces about the anatomy of the way the spine works is there are 26 joints, which makes it much more dramatic, much more different, much more complicated than the shoulder or the knee. And those are complicated enough, right? Because they're only one. The second piece that's important is that the head is the top and the pelvis is the bottom of this chain of bones. And what you do with your head or what you do with the pelvis directs what happens up the chain. You can't really move your head without affecting the spine. You can't move the pelvis without affecting the spine. And when I think about spinal extension, what I think about primarily is creating space very specifically between the ear and the shoulder and between the rib and the hip. Those are the spaces that tend to get compressed because they don't have any cage around them, like the rib cage. So the rib cage kind of establishes space because it's one unit and it's all the ribs are attached to the thoracic vertebrae. So they kind of take care of themselves, right? But here and in the waist, there isn't a structural support system. So we have to create that. So my primary goal when I talk about spinal extension is space, and then drawing the head back enough so that the spine is stacked properly. So there's that, okay? So when you're teaching spinal extension, as we move through the month, I want you to be aware of first the head alignment. So one of the things about the head is that it's super mobile. The neck is super mobile. It needs to be, right? The more mobility you have, the more prone to injury it is. And I'll tell you right now, nobody over the age of probably 10 has a perfectly aligned neck, just based on, all the stuff that we do all day long. So getting the head to be in neutral before you move, or the neck, I should say, is super important. So one thing that you can cue all day, every day, is generally drawing the head back. So if you're in a live class, I spend a lot of time just putting my hand on the head back of people's heads and having them press back because the head tends to push forward. You'll see this in triangle pose, side angle. It doesn't have to be a back bend, but first getting that head in the proper alignment. Second, if you lead with your head on a back bend, meaning like you hyperextend the neck, what happens when you do that is it tells the rest of the spine down the chain to stop moving because you've already gone too far. So when you initiate back bends, especially poses like Ustrasana, you want the head in neutral or even in a slight flex, because what that will do is allow the rest of the spine to move into its fullest expression. So here we are building towards our Ustrasana, right? So if I go straight back with my head, that's going to limit the amount of extension I can get from the rest of the spine, right? If I keep my chin in tucked or my head in neutral, that allows for a significant more spinal extension. And then I'm going to layer on neutral neck or chin to chest. What you do not want is the head going straight backwards. So the gaze is up, and that allows for that lift, and it's not behind you. Okay, so there's that. Second thing is when you're building back bends like Dhanurasana, and Shalabhasana, and dancer's pose, Natarjasana. You want to put a couple things in play before you layer on. So again, if we're working in our belly down back bends, there appears to be a dog here. Shalabhasana is the spinal extension part, right? And then you're going to layer on a little bit of your hip extension. You cannot do one without the other. Then you're going to bend, then you reach, and then the final bit would be to catch and lift. What you want to avoid doing is beginning the back bend from the knees. So I'm going to bring my feet up, reach, grab, and then the only thing I can do now is pull myself backwards. Now, the problem with that is twofold. One is that you're using your strong legs and the spinal muscles do not have to be involved. But secondly, when you use your legs, two things happen. The knees are definitely vulnerable because see how close they are, right? We know that less than 90 degrees makes them less stable. But two, your quads are significantly stronger than your lower back muscles. We want the lower back to do the work. And then you layer on the lift. So the same goes in your Natarjasana, same idea here. You build the back bend first because the spinal extension happens here, right? The knee and the leg have really nothing to do with it. So let's start with our spinal extension, layer on the hip extension, and then you look for the knee or the foot, and then you build it from there, as opposed to neutral spine, neutral hip, grab, jut back. So hopefully that makes sense. So the goal, if the goal is lift and expand, you always want to initiate with that. That's the primary goal. Getting hold of the ankles is not. And that just adds on a lot more potential leverage. So being aware of how your back bends begin, where they're supposed to be established from. And the last piece is, and again, we'll come back to the belly down specifically. The other muscles that can do the work are the glutes. Now we talk about this all the time in class, turn your glutes off, turn your glutes off. What I like to think about more is what do they do? How do they do it? And how do we make it harder for them to do it? So the glutes are a hip extensor. So you can't turn them off completely because you're in hip extension. However, you wanna minimize their work so that you can get more from the spinal extensors. So again, belly bends. Two things. They abduct and they extend and they externally rotate. So how can we turn them off more than they are in that position? Well, you can adduct and internally rotate. You still want the hip extension. You just don't want the other bits. So when we talk about setting up the legs to get the feet close together, it's to counteract the most effort from the glute. Okay. So if I go here and wide, then the first thing that's going to happen is my glutes are going to engage. And what that does, these guys are big and strong. It's going to shove your pelvis down into the floor. And some of you may have felt that before, the pubic bone hitting the ground hard. And what happens is that's the bottom of the chain. So if you initiate from the pelvis, it's going to prevent the rest of the spine to extend. So closer in, internal rotation. Then you extend the hips, you extend the spine, but you're avoiding the glutes doing maximum effort. You can't turn them off completely, but you can turn off the strength of them by not letting them do the other two bits. Final piece, and this is super important. The way the spine is designed, there are little pockets of cushion, fluid, in between each vertebrae. They're called the discs, right? I know you all know that. What happens when you move from spinal extension into flexion. So essentially, like when we talk about building back bends, the idea is you're kind of molding those discs to free up that space. Because they're softer tissue and they're hydraulic in nature, they can slide a little. So I want you to think about when you eat a sandwich, right? And you bite down really hard and everything slides out the other side. What you want to avoid with your discs is not doing that, right? You want to try to maintain a controlled movement from this end so it allows the disc to move a little bit, but it doesn't get compressed on the end where your teeth are. Not that you're biting, you understand. I hope that analogy works. So this progressive back bending helps to kind of mold them. Now, once they've gone into the space where they need to go to allow for more extension, you need to put them back into a neutral place before you flex. Because if you flex immediately after spinal extension, you are going to do that bite. You're going to create compression, and that's not good. So how do you do that? You always come back to neutral and you repressurize the discs by engaging the core. So that's why when we do that little bit of core work in between, it's super critical. It's not just about putting the bones back in place. It's also about resetting the discs so they're ready for another movement or a different kind of movement. So pose, counterpose, always neutral in the middle, okay? Neutral spine is really the best place to start anything that you do. It doesn't matter what it is. Set neutral, engage the core, and you move into your twist, into any posture, right? But in particular, in between extension and flexion. So that's my little spiel about the spinal extension piece. So ultimately, what we want is to encourage people to establish more length, more space, more height, right? And then you layer on more dramatic movements with extension, with bent knees or straight legs or all of that. When you bend the knee, you add on an extra piece, which is the rectus femoris, which is one of the quads. So that's just another element, but it's not the only element. So hopefully this all gives you some places to work with and some places to work towards. But I would love to have a conversation about it if you have questions, because I'm super nerdy about it. I know most of you are too. So let me know. And just to quick bullet points, more space here, head needs to come back, more space between the hips and the ribs. Initiate all back bends from neutral to spinal extension to hip extension. And then you'd layer on a bent knee. Do not counterpose immediately, establish neutral, repressurize. Make people feel taller, make people feel more open at the end of the practice than they were when they started. Hope that makes sense. Love you guys so much, and I'm excited for our new venture, moving into this new wild west of a world. And so far we've made it. So it's all because of you guys, and I really appreciate it. Love you all, and we'll talk soon. Bye. Hi. I'm going to unrecord that. Let me see. How are you? You don't usually do Friday mornings, do you?
I'm just doing for Laura.
Oh.
Yeah, fine.
Why won't the recording stop? Is it on your end? Oh, I see it.